Welcome to the latest episode of the Informing Choices Minipod, where today we're tracking a vital trend around how organizations operate, embracing agility in our operating frameworks. This isn't just about speed, it's about how businesses can pivot quickly, efficiently, and sustainably to meet ever-changing market demands. First up, we'll explore how operating frameworks are evolving from rigid structures to agile methodologies. What does it really mean to adapt an agile posture? And more importantly, how can it transform the way we work? We'll then dig into three key drivers behind this shift towards agility. Is it technological advancement, competitive pressure, or perhaps the push for innovation that's steering this change? Looking ahead, we'll envision the future, both the bright side and the challenges. What could our world look like in 2030 if organizations succeed in fully embracing agility or fail to adapt? And finally, we'll discuss the practical steps that organizations can take right now. These insights could help businesses not just survive, but thrive in a rapidly evolving landscape. I'm delighted once again to welcome co-founder of Working the Future, Cathryn Barnard, to our sixth of these collaborative podcasts. Cat, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back, Steve.
So how do you see operating frameworks changing to adopt a more agile posture?
So I think for the past couple of decades, there has been a tacit or maybe overt recognition that the world is moving at a faster pace and that organizations do need to become more agile and market responsive. So the origins of agile, this is very boring, so bear with me, but the origins of agile emanate from the software industry, and up until 2001, when software was developed, it was developed using a methodology called waterfall, which would usually comprise one, maybe two software releases per year, very heavily scheduled, very heavily proceduralized, etc. But a cohort of software engineers recognized that actually that pace was far too slow for the dynamics of the technology sector, and so squirreled themselves away. I can't remember the name of the ski resort, but squirreled themselves away one weekend in 2001 and came up with literally a one-page manifesto for how a faster pace of software development could exist, still with guardrails and checks and parameters, but that would allow software to be developed and released to commercially to the open market in a way that met the needs of modern consumers.
Right.
And so agile methodology within the software industry allowed consumers to experience a much faster pace of software releases, and in fact brought consumers in to act as beta testers for the software development industry, so that part of the development process meant that the testing was taking place in live, contained, but live environments rather than in a safe, secure, away from the scenes environment that wasn't in direct contact with the public. So that's kind of a little bit of the backdrop. If you look at the way in which, and we've discussed this in previous episodes, if you look at the way in which the pace of markets has been accelerated by both the internet and the impact of mobile technology on globalization, you can see we're operating in a very, very different context now, where in any given week, your organization might start to experience competition from a corner of the world that you just not anticipated, or you might start to see the prevalence of something happening in a separate industry that is still separate but somewhat aligned to your own, and you recognize that that is going to have irrevocable impacts on your industry in due course. Modern organizations need to be very observant and very forward thinking, continuously seeking to look round corners at what the next risk factor could be. And it demands a completely different way of organizing. If you want to become future-proof, you need all eyes and ears observant to the external market context. And that just requires a very different way of organizing yourself to allow knowledge and information to flow through an organization as quickly as it possibly can.
So give me an example of how an agile enabled organization looks and feels different to a more traditional, a non-agile organization, I guess.
So first and foremost, I think we need to be thinking about how we move command and control and decision making away from the epicenter of the organization. So traditional organizations are hierarchical, and command, control, and decision making exists at the epicenter amongst an elite squad of decision makers. We need to shift decision making away from the center, and we need to empower decision making to take place wherever it is contextually relevant. So we need to teach our internal stakeholders about the art of responsible, inclusive, fair decision making, and empower them to be able to make decisions that are contextually apt at the moment, at the point in time where that decision needs to be made. We cannot wait for information to flow up to the helm of the organization and for a decision to flow back down to wherever the actual action needs to take place. We need every single internal stakeholder educated and informed and able to take action where the action is needed. So taking command and control out of the center, repositioning intelligence, organizational intelligence, instead of assuming it sits at the epicenter in this elite cadre of MBA qualified executives, we need to adjust our thinking such that we now redistribute intelligence across the organization and work on the basis that, do you know what, your customer service agent is the most qualified person to make a decision about whether or not the organization can meet the needs of that external stakeholder and whatever it is they're asking for. And we need to maintain some semblance of process, but we also need to couple that with the nurturing of environments that encourage experimentation and innovation. So rather than be doggedly constrained by process and procedure in a way that, you know, would remind us of some comedic sketches of the not too distant past, the computer says no sketch, you know, we need to empower people to be able to make decisions that are contextually relevant and fitting to meet the needs of the stakeholders that are asking for clarity.
It sounds to me that one of the things that you're looking for in organizations there is a tolerance of failure within reason. Do you think that's a really big kind of cultural barrier for many organizations to make the step towards a more agility?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that there has been a generation of executive education that has taught ways of gaining operational efficiency that are contextually apt for trading conditions that are grounded in stability.
Hmm.
But we're not in any stable territory at all anymore. And the only way that we can feel our way through is to experiment and to try and to get comfortable with failure. And I think there are, you can sandbox failure.
Yeah.
There are so many ways. You've worked in pharma in the course of your career. You know the ways in which you can experiment safely. And so we need to have more conversation about all the various ways in which we can experiment safely and then go and do.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes perfect sense. Um, so I think we're going to cover some reasonably familiar ground with the next question, because I wanted to ask, given this shift towards more agile operating frameworks, what are the three drivers that you see are really powering this trend?
So this goes back to some of the trends that we've talked about on previous episodes, and a couple of the trends that we've perhaps not addressed yet, but will address in later episodes. I would say that at a meta level of systems, we need to understand just how volatile the markets and trading environments have become, and understand some of the causal factors. So the inexorable march of technology is one causal factor. We cannot stop the pace at which technology is evolving. We've talked in previous episode about, the fact that we're almost in a new Cold War, perhaps, but in a quasi trade war here in the West, with the progress in that China is making in terms of artificial intelligence and so on. We need to be live to the fact that globalization converged with the internet is globalization on steroids, and you just cannot be sure where your next competitive threat will come from. I think any organization that is hoping to remain viable over the next decade needs to remain hypervigilant to the threats and risks to its existence. And I think also, we live in a world now where consumer behavior has changed because of coming up 20 years of internet enabled choice, and consumer behavior influences buying behavior in work as well. So B2B buying behaviors. And we need to think about how modern consumers make purchasing choices and remain totally live to that. And we've said it before in previous episodes, and think about all the ways in which we, within our organizations, can start to build relationships and trust and goodwill with our external stakeholders, our customers, past, present, and future, and so on. We have got to be live to those risks and adapt the way that we structure and organize ourselves at work to optimally respond to the risks posed by the external marketplace.
And if we start to think about the future and the role that these kind of more agile operating frameworks play in the success or otherwise of enterprise, do you think it's as straightforward as saying agile organizations survive, and that's the optimistic view of the future, but those that choose not to adapt will die, or is there kind of a bit more subtlety in there?
I suppose in its most black and white form, yeah, I absolutely agree. You know, the dystopian view is organizations that cannot embrace agility will wither and die. But I think a more interesting lens through which to look is all the gains that can be, you know, achievable when agility and distributed, decentralized decision making are adopted. If you think about, you know, some baseline aspirations that most human beings wish for from their work. You know, everybody wants to know that their contribution matters at the end of the day, right? We all want to know that the things that we did today actually made a difference. Nobody wants to be doing meaningless work, and nobody wants to be continuously feeling as if it wouldn't make a difference if they weren't here. You know, there's such a lot of goodwill that we have in our gift to harness if we double down on creating the psychological conditions for people to do their best work and entrusting people to do their best work, empowering people to do their best work, equally teaching people how to do their best work. You know,
Yeah.
there is an aspect to this of, rather than treat all employees or all staff as the naughty toddler who can't be trusted, why not teach all internal stakeholders what looking and behaving like a responsible, proactive adult looks and feels like?
One of the things I am finding really interesting, and it's not just in this episode, but other episodes as well, is how important behaviors are. And the thing that's particularly striking me at the moment is it feels like you're talking about humanizing people at work through helping them feel their value. And that's brought about, I suppose, by how leaders within the organization change their behavior to those people that are working with them. It's critically important, isn't it?
It is critically important, but therein lies the rub.
Mm,
How many leaders out there at the moment understand intrinsically that they are part of the system that they are seeking to influence, and therefore recognize that in order to change the system, they need to change themselves?
yeah,
You can't expect anybody to adapt their behavior as a leader until you are willing to adapt your own behavior, and more poignantly, role model the behavior that you seek to see in the world, because that is how humans change their behavior.
yeah, that is really, really interesting. I really love the way that we're kind of talking almost about the nub now. Despite the march of technology, and we've spoken about that in previous episodes as well. Despite increasing digitization, the thing that makes the difference is the humans, the people, and how we treat them.
Yeah. And that, you know, every single stakeholder that an organization has is a human being.
Mm. It's odd. One of the things that is odd is how there's the words we use to describe enterprise or business or other. So, we talk about an organization, so it prevents us, it stops us talking about people because it gets a bit messy there. Even when an organization is downsizing, looking at efficiency, getting efficiencies through mergers, actually what we're talking about is getting rid of people. The language is very kind of mechanical, isn't it? About something that's actually purely human.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Really, really
sterile.
interesting.
It's emotionally void. Human capital. Who wants to be known as human capital?
Yeah.
I mean, it is just extraordinary, but therein lies the opportunity. And not everybody will do it. Not every organization will be able to adapt. And maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe we need to, as in nature, maybe we need to clear out the environment a little bit to make way for green shoots.
Yeah, it's a really interesting perspective. I love that kind of biological twist there. So the final question that I've got then is what action, and again, I think we've been kind of covering some of the points here, but what action could organizations take now with this insight in relation to these kind of new operating frameworks?
So I think if you're not doing it already, I think you need to educate yourself on what agility actually is, because it isn't a methodology so much as a mindset.
Yeah,
And if we can educate ourselves on mindset agility, then we can also educate ourselves on, the psychological attributes and behaviors that we collectively need to successfully adapt. I think, agility, regrettably, like it or not, agility is a prerequisite for success in the future of work. Failure to respond in an agile way to external market forces equals, in my book, end of life stasis. I think we have to start exploring ways in which decision making can be distributed across organizations in order to empower the maximum number of internal stakeholders to be able to make good decisions in the best interests of all their other stakeholders. And again, it requires some education there. But this is the thing, the organization is unlikely to educate itself unless it sees its C-suite educating itself. Because why would it? It's at the moment, it's easier to say nothing and wait for somebody who's getting paid the big bucks to make the decisions, Not my job, not my, not my not my pay level,
yeah,
etc. It's just easier to. This is why quiet quitting is so endemic. This is why we have such an array of people doing the bare bones minimum, because just do the minimum for an easy life. It's somebody else's responsibility to make the big decisions, and guess what? They're getting paid a lot more than me, so why would I make those decisions for them? That whole kind of redistribution of power and responsibility needs to happen. And in all likelihood, Steve, we also need to have some pretty meaty conversations about wealth inequality within our organizations, because you can't necessarily expect anybody to make decisions for you if you're still taking 7, 8, 9 times as much as the people that you are now expecting to make viable commercial decisions for your business. That's just, why would anyone do that? We've already talked about, talent ecosystems and the rise of self-employment, the rise of people taking their careers into their own hands. So there's a lot going on there, I appreciate, but I wholeheartedly feel that the new leadership imperative is to create the environmental conditions for workers to fulfill their potential in service of the shared mission and the optimal range of stakeholders. But that also requires leaders to step down off their, out of their gilded existences and get real with the people.
yeah. So I was kind of, as I've been doing, kind of encapsulate that. I think the things that really stuck out for me are the distributed decision making, humanizing work and the workforce, and that agility equals resilience and therefore ultimately relevance and equity within the organization as a key enabler of motivation. Cat, thank you. That's been absolutely marvelous. Once again, some really fascinating insights. Thoroughly enjoyed that. Thanks ever so much for your time.
Thank you, Steve.
In the podcast description, you'll find a link to Working the Future website and just a note on how you can contact Cat if you want to know more about Working the Future. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. Do subscribe so you never miss another episode, and do let your friends and colleagues know about the Informing Choices mini pod, and we'll see you on another episode very soon.